Welcome to the Influential Motherhood Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Duncan, and my dream is to inspire moms to pursue their goals and help them make a difference in their world. I'm a mom of 2 young boys, a wife to my high school sweetheart, and a lawyer. This show is a place to hear stories of moms working hard to have a positive influence in their profession or their community, and sometimes both, even as they juggle their responsibilities at work, at home, and to their children. You'll get tangible, practical tips for managing the chaotic world of motherhood and work. Come along as we hear these stories and feel inspired to step outside of our comfort zone as leaders and as a positive force within our communities. I believe that moms can change the world. I am here with Joey Schewee, who is the Vice President of Admissions, Financial Aid, and Alumni at John Paul II High School in Plano, Texas, which is a big job. But on top of that, Joey is a mom of 2 boys, a wife, and also teaches the Enneagram and parenting. So welcome, Joey. We are excited to have a good chat today about how the Enneagram impacts parenting. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. So I kind of gave the very brief summary of a little bit about who you are and what you do, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about your job and your family, and then kind of how you became familiar with the Enneagram, and then we'll start to really dig into the Enneagram and the work that you do. But just give us a little bit more about Joey before we get started.
Okay, sounds good. So I am, as you mentioned, the vice president for 3 big offices at a Catholic high school in Texas. And when I went to college, I went to Hendrix College and played tennis and was an English major. And everybody said to me, "Oh, you'll teach. You're going to teach." And I said, "No, absolutely not." That was the furthest thing from my mind. I wanted to conquer the corporate world, much like an 8 on the Enneagram would. And I was in investments right out of college, and kind of 3 years in, found my way into coaching, and I loved it. I left the investment world and cut my salary in half and doubled my workload, and I'd never been happier. So I kind of found my way to JP2, and when it was a new school, brand new opening, and started the tennis program here and moved into admissions. And so I've been here 14 years.
Wow.
Have been a part of building something. It's the only Catholic high school in Collin County, which if you're in the Dallas area, that's kind of a big deal. And I've enjoyed, really investing myself in growing something, which again lends itself to being an 8 on the Enneagram when we talk about that a little more.
Yeah, that's amazing.
My husband Billy and I met in college, and he played baseball, and we were both from the Dallas area, so there was no issues in moving back to Texas after school. We've been married 16 years, and we have a 13-year-old, Will, and a 10-year-old, Sam. And luckily for us, because we started dating in college, because of who my mother is. So my mother is a well-known entity in the Enneagram world. My mom is Suzanne Stabile, so she's the co-author of the best-selling book, and I think the best Enneagram primer out there, The Road Back to You. And kind of the way that came about for my mom is Ian Crohn, who's the co-author with her, actually asked her to come teach where he was in Greenwich, Connecticut.
Oh, okay.
And Ian, being the someone with a 3 with a lot of ingenuity, knew that we needed to get Enneagram to the masses. So he said to my mom, "You're the Enneagram master. I'm a best-selling author. Let's come together and do something that will reach as many people as possible." So thus was born The Road Back to You. And then my mom has written a second book on her own, The Path Between Us, which is a follow-up to The Road Back to You. So being the oldest daughter of Suzanne Stabile, I've known it, longer than I haven't. So Billy and I together, we were dating at that time as early as 19 years old when we both learned the Enneagram. So we've known it our whole married life, our whole life as parents, and we're both in education. and we both help teach the Enneagram. With the publishing of the first book, my mom's schedule filled very quickly. And being a master teacher, she travels, internationally at this point. Both books, I think, are published in 5 different languages now. And so Billy and I started kind of just taking smaller teaching opportunities that my mom couldn't fit into her schedule. And both of us found a real passion for it. And in these years, with all the traveling and teaching my mom has done for the last 25 years, she looked at both of us and said, the one thing that she gets asked for all the time that she just does not believe is hers to do is teaching Enneagram and parenting. And so we know that there's a real audience for that. And so he and I have come together to take that on. And we've actually been working on the curriculum around that for about 18 months now. And we're getting ready to teach it locally for the first time this fall.
Wow. That's amazing. And I just can only imagine what a tremendous help knowing the Enneagram has been in your marriage, and,
right.
And to be able to transition into parenthood already knowing the Enneagram, because I feel like becoming a parent just rocks your world.
Exactly.
So I think this is wonderful. So as far as, the Enneagram itself, so I just kind of want to pause for a second. For those who might be listening and saying, what is this word that you're saying? Ennea what? Could you just give us a very general summary of it, and then point us towards the resources that a person could go to maybe figure out what number they are on the Enneagram?
Sure, absolutely. I find myself, I've been teaching it nationally, actually, at this point for a decade now, and invariably I'll be somewhere and someone asks me essentially for the, what is it? So I've got to have the elevator speech prepared. Yep. and knowing it as long as I have, for 22 years now, and teaching it for 12, I don't have the perfect answer, which is, how do you describe something that can be so helpful and so life-changing, and yet keep people from thinking that it's so narrow, because it shows you 9 ways of being in the world.
Right.
But essentially, what I like to tell people is it's an ancient knowledge and wisdom. It's believed to be between 2,000 and 4,000 years old. And it really only made its way to the United States probably on the mainstream level in the mid to late 70s. And I think the reason that it's lasted so long and that it's gaining so much traction right now is, in my finding, it's the only personality typing system out there that really speaks to your motivations and not your behavior.
Yeah.
So everything else out there really gets to, your behavior. So you're typed based on, what you do. Enneagram gets to why you do what you do.
Right.
And I think it's unique from what I've found in working on my own master's degree and in education and working with different, personality typing systems out there. When you can take a look at why you're motivated to do something, and that you see how you see the world is different from, other people, then that's really, it causes you to take a whole new look at things. So I like to say that I called my mom. I tell this story often when I'm teaching. I called my mom probably 7 or 8 years ago, and I said, the golden rule is not working for me. I am treating people exactly like I want to be treated, and it is not going well. And what that means for an Enneagram 8 is I don't want you to sugarcoat information. I don't want you to beat around the bush when you talk to me. I want you to just give me the straight facts. I want you to be blunt and direct and straight. And because that's what I want to receive, I was giving that to people. But the truth is that 90% of people actually like a little sugarcoating and a little softness. So then that became my responsibility, once I know how different people are from me, that I've got to do that work as I relate to people. And honestly, as an 8 on the Enneagram, 8s aren't very relational, even just at their core. We are all about infusing our energy into making things bigger and greater and better. And it's about the thing or the event or the group. And we're not very equipped naturally to see people individually.
Yeah.
And that creates a lot of misunderstanding. And so I say all the time that I'm very fortunate to have the position that I am at, that I have at JP2. I absolutely would not be the vice president without Enneagram work.
Yeah.
I think a lot of employers, when they have 8s on their staffs, a lot are leaders, but a lot of employers also are doing a constant balance, because 8s bring so much to a business and to a profession, a lot of energy, a lot of ideas. And for all that they bring, they struggle relationally with the people they work with. And without that help, there's so much misunderstanding that happens that I think employers are kind of constantly weighing the good, everything that an 8 brings versus the liability that we can be from an HR standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's wonderful. And one thing that I think has been helpful to me as I've been learning about the Enneagram is to think about how, I'm a 7. So I'm a 7 and you're an 8, we might, to someone on the outside, we might do the same thing, as an act, or say the same thing, but it comes from a different place. We're doing it for different reasons. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm so glad you said that, because that brings up kind of the next really most important piece, because whether you know the Enneagram or you want to learn about it or you want to share it with someone, that our tendency, just I think as human beings, is to do it the fastest way possible. And we have found in Mom first in her 25 years of teaching, then me coming behind her in 12 years, that written indicators are wrong. They are incorrect for Enneagram more than 60% of the time.
Yeah.
And that's because of what you just said. You and I, so many questions that you will have on a written indicator really can only scratch the surface of behavior.
Right.
So you're exactly right. You and I, as a 7 and an 8, and a 3 is in the category with you and I, might do a lot of the same things, but we do it for very different reasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
So kind of our way to say that is you can't rush a 4,000-year-old wisdom. You've got the best way is to listen. So, and that's, my mom and I are unique. I follow in her footsteps in that my teaching style is narrative teaching, and Billy and I adopted that for Enneagram and parenting as well. So we teach using stories,
which is
rather
so
than
helpful.
just straight information.
Yeah, I love it. So your husband is a 9. Am I remembering that correctly? Okay.
So, yes, Billy is a 9 on the Enneagram.
Okay. So how has the Enneagram helped you individually and then you together in parenting, before we kind of dig into, talking about how the audience can take the Enneagram in parenting? I'm curious to hear some of these stories of how it has impacted your parenting skills.
Okay.
Or not skills. That's probably
sure. Well,
experiences.
Honed it exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the, I mentioned that one of the other things that I love about the Enneagram is it's not static. So you really, there is no end to what you can learn, and going deeper. And I think part of that has to do with motivation, and part of it has to do is there are so many ways that we are different from each other, but that we also intersect. So in Enneagram language, you and I, Melissa, are in the same stance. As a 7 and 8, we're both in the aggressive stance. So 3s, 7s, and 8s are in the aggressive stance. Billy, my husband, as a 9, and I are in the same triad. So 8s, 9s, and 1s are in the gut triad or the anger triad. And 8 anger comes out usually straight up, and we once we say it, we're done. We really are. We're finished. There's nothing that we carry beyond that. That of course takes people off guard a lot. I was teaching at a specialist hospital recently, and I had a head of nursing mention that her nurses she was an 8, and that her nurses had called her two-faced, which is never something that is associated with 8s.
Yeah.
And it was because she would jump them for something that they weren't doing correctly, but then it was over, and she would ask them to go to lunch because it was really over, right, for an 8.
Yeah.
So for me, conflict energizes me. I mean, there's really no other word for it. For my husband, Billy, he's also dealing with anger, but his is usually more passive aggressive, and he's got it. He's dealing with it in some of the same ways I am, but he's trying to hold it in.
Yeah.
So 9s are the one, and the 8s have the most energy on the Enneagram, and 9s have the least energy. And I think one of the main reasons is because 9s are double boundaried. So they're boundaried internally. They're keeping that anger in that they naturally have. And at the same time, they're keeping the external world from taking their peace. Yeah. And 9s are known for their peacefulness. Yeah. So at the same time, 9s really, in the way that conflict energizes 8s, it makes 9s so uncomfortable. Yeah. And anything can be, considered conflict in an 8's eyes. Or
where do you want to go for dinner, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
So I tell a story about Billy and I as an 8 and a 9 being just in our car in the Target parking lot. And we're not even looking for this parking spot. We're just observing it happening. We watched 2 cars going for the same spot. And we're both gut-centered. That's what we're known as the gut triad. So I immediately get a jolt of energy as an 8. I mean, I'm ready to shop. It's like a shot of espresso for me. Well, Billy feels it internally the same way, but it makes him physically ill. He just absolutely hates that conflict. So you can imagine, take something that simple into parenting.
Oh gosh, yeah.
You can imagine all the things that I find to be just something, let's just get it out on the table and talk about it, and then it can be over. Right. Billy does not see the world that way at all. And then he brings to the table, we're both very, as an 8 and a 9, we usually know what we think about something. 9s are more reluctant as a withdrawn number to share it. Yeah. But they usually have an opinion. But the thing that 9s bring to the table is they're really capable of harmonizing conflicting points of view. And it's because they dislike conflict so much. Yeah. And they can see both sides. So it's not terribly fun to parent with someone who can see why the boys might have done what they did when I need him to, be on my side, and that they shouldn't have done it. Right. Right.
And the energy that you're bringing, I don't know, bringing or receiving from the usually, from the conflict, is making him want to retreat. So do you feel like your boys pick up on those differences? And is it like I'm going to now choose who I go to for it? How do you work through
without
that?
Without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt. And really what's interesting for Billy and I, knowing it as long as we have, is we've never not known it, right? Yeah. So we've always talked using Enneagram language in our home. So we say that, as we start teaching the Enneagram, you may not know your child's exact Enneagram number, because they have to figure that out for themselves, right? Because they know their motivations. But you can pretty with fairly good certainty, you can figure out their stance, either aggressive, 8s, 3s, and 7s, or dependent, 1s, 2s, and 6s, or withdrawing, 9s, 4s, and 5s. Okay. And our son Will, because we have used this language always, he's a 4 on the Enneagram. He's identified it himself. He's definitely an old soul. He does well socially, but all of his friends' moms love Will because he's just this old soul who can kind of relate to parents, right? And then Sam, we're almost positive that Sam is a 7. So we've approached both of them knowing or believing that they're those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Now the boys themselves, if they get in trouble at school, they're calling Billy first. For sure.
Because I feel like I've heard this, like the school won't even call you, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. If the boys get to choose, the school's going to call, Billy first, because Billy's all about, we'll handle it at home. I'm sure they had a good reason, and whereas if it's me, I'm going to make the principal feel like he, or assistant principal feel like he or she needs to soften up, because I'm going to go at them on the phone probably more than they even thought they would.
Yeah.
That being
That's
said,
funny.
Because we do talk about it so much in the house,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm already thinking about something that happened on the way to church on Sunday. The boys definitely know that once I say what I have to say, then we're really good, and I feel like they have come to appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I have to constantly work to measure how much I amp it up in the moment.
Yeah. So as an 8, because as a 7, I don't experience this, but as an 8, if you are measured in how, kind of your level of intensity in responding to something with one of your kids, it seems to me, I mean, I kind of have this visual in my head of like, out of 100% intensity, if you let out 60%, where does the other 40% go? Does that, how do you let go of that other 40%?
That's a great question. And so much Enneagram work for all of us, once you know your number, comes in just non-judgmentally observing yourself and not reacting. We all react, and we usually react in probably the average to lower part of our personality. Mm-hmm. So some of the best work I've done is responding rather than reacting. And that means taking time.
Yeah.
That means, and some of that dissipates then. I've found that if I don't react in the moment, and even if it's just taken 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Because for 8s, we would never want to be inauthentic.
Right.
And to, in the moment, try not to have as much energy and anger as we have right there on the surface would come across as condescending. And I'm very aware of that as a manager of people.
Yeah.
And so, it really is a matter of kind of taking a break, taking a pause.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good.
Hey friends, popping into this fun episode to remind you to take a quick second to subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. And don't forget, you can also sign up for bonus episodes and content from my monthly newsletter at melissaduncan.com/join. Thanks for listening, and let's get back to the show.
So I want to kind of go back to what you were talking about with, your kids have to come into their number on their own. So what age would you say, I mean, I know it varies for every kid, but give us a range of when a parent could start expecting their kid to kind of understand the Enneagram enough to be able to identify their number.
I really think, depending on the kid and depending on how much you're communicating with each other in your household, I was raised in a home where, we ate dinner on the table every night, family dinner, family conversation. We had family meetings when, there was conflict in the house.
Yeah.
So when you've got a lot of relational awareness like that, I think it could be as young as when your kid gets to be 8, 9, 10.
Okay.
Honestly.
Yeah.
And without that, I really think they probably need to be in high school.
Okay. Yeah.
Is what I would say. I think that's what I would say.
Okay. That's good. That's helpful. So I appreciate what you were saying about trying to identify their stance. And, maybe because you don't want to type you don't want to type anybody without them identifying it themselves is what I understand. But are there any, let's say I decide that one of my kids is probably a 4, and just based on, the way I see him reacting. I have two boys, and let's say I decide one of mine is a 4. Are there any numbers as far as, the kid is this number and one of the parents is this number that are particularly susceptible to, I guess, heightened challenges in parenting?
Sure.
And what could parents do to navigate through that?
Well, you bring up, I think the most important thing to do is, as any parent starts down this Enneagram path, you can't be a good parent using the Enneagram unless you are aware of your own pitfalls in your number and you're doing your work first, right?
Yep.
That being said, interestingly enough, I think an 8 and a 4, probably any aggressive number in a 4 would be, could spark a lot of energy. And it's because of stance is, 4s, while 4s are in the withdrawing stance, they're feeling first.
Right.
And the 4 is the number on the Enneagram whose feelings fluctuate the most quickly and the most intensely.
Okay.
Now that gets dangerous when you're looking at your teen, because I think we have a lot of angsty teens out there that we could identify as 4s.
Yeah.
So to illustrate the best way I know how, I'm going to use a story about when Billy and I really kind of decided as a couple that we were pretty sure Will was a 4, and we were going to start parenting him as a 4.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, I have a 4 and a 7, and 4s and 7s look a lot alike as young children. They want a full schedule. They don't like when plans change. They don't like when the fun ends, and they will react accordingly. And when I think Will was probably about 5 years old, and Sam had been sick. Sam had been home with the flu. And so Will, as a 4, was already disappointed. 4s deal with disappointment. Like, that's their main thing. They cannot help the way they see the world, and the way they see the world is they always see what's missing. And there's always something missing.
Oh, okay.
So
That's
I say often when I'm teaching how thankful I am for the Enneagram, because without it, being Will's parent, or being the parent, I think, of any 4, you would tend to think and even say maybe that your child was ungrateful, was bratty, was spoiled.
Yeah.
All of those things, because when things don't go their way, or even when things are going kind of well, they're wired to notice what's missing.
Right.
So Sam had been ill, and so Will was already disappointed that he couldn't stay home from school like Sam could. And we had been waiting at the pharmacy. So Sam's only like 2.5 at this point. And while we were waiting for his medication, he wanted some Spider-Man sunglasses, and we bought them for him. And so Will, came home from school, and justifiably, as probably any number on the Enneagram would, he wanted some Spider-Man sunglasses. And we said, Will, that's reasonable, and we'll get you some Sunday on our way to church. And we were late to church. Definitely my fault. Anyone who thinks 8s are always punctual would be incorrect. And we're on our way, and we say to Will, we're going to be late to church, so we're going to get your sunglasses after church. And we were met with the usual Will deep sigh. Just like something else that just didn't go right.
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember looking at Billy, who was driving, and then turning and looking at Will and saying, buddy, we love you. And if we made ourselves even later to church to get the sunglasses for you now, you would find something else to be disappointed in later today. So I'm glad that you can put your disappointment right now into not having the sunglasses.
Yeah.
Now, you got to be careful with that, because I'm sure anyone can see how that could get patronizing pretty quickly. But we've essentially, as parents, used that in some form or fashion for the last 8 years. He's
Yeah, that's
13,
great.
and it means we don't get caught up in the fluctuating emotions, but we don't get mad about it, and we don't admonish him for it. We just we know those are natural for him, and we don't try to fix it, but we
Right.
don't walk away.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. That is so good. I feel like I need to do so much more work in figuring out my kids' stance. What is it about, like, how does someone's stance display itself? Like, if I'm
Sure. How to stance.
observing
Sure.
yeah, so I have a 5.5-year-old and a 3-year-old. So how is their stance going to show itself to me?
Well, you got to understand first just the basics of stances. And one way that I teach differently from my mother, while we're both the narrative teachers, when I teach a basic know your number, I actually teach in stance order. And so one of the things that I find to be fascinating about the Enneagram is how other understandings and knowledge and teaching can layer onto it so easily. And so the idea, which is not Enneagram specific, that we're all born with 3 native intelligence centers: thinking, feeling, and doing. Yes. What do I think? What do I feel? What am I going to do? We all have that on board. And the understanding, again, not Enneagram specific, is that one of those centers at some point in our childhood comes forward, and it's our dominant center. And it's the center that we take in the world with, and then we process. So we take in and process information through that center. Okay. And then the second center kind of supports that. And then the third center kind of falls away and is kind of the least easily accessed, the least accessed. Okay. In Enneagram language, that's actually called the repressed center. Yeah. But people who don't know the Enneagram yet, or they're just learning it, they don't love to hear repressed anything. So I usually try to use least accessed. Yeah. And so you and me, as a 7 and an 8 and 3s, all being in the aggressive stance, we have all 3 of us have a different center that's dominant, but all 3 of us have the same least accessed center, and that's feeling. So, amen. Right.
As everyone who knows me would attest.
Would definitely attest. And so, so for me, I'm doing dominant. Thinking supports my doing, and I'm feeling least accessed for sure. For you, you're thinking dominant. Yep. And doing supports your thinking, and feeling is least accessed for you. 3s, for anyone who's looking at the actual Enneagram, you kind of, especially if you see the arrows where numbers are going in stress and security, you'll see with arrows going every different way, there's one triangle in the middle. And that's the 3-6-9 triangle. Those are known as the primary numbers in each triad. They're the middle number in each triad. And for those 3 numbers, the center that is dominant is also least accessed. So essentially, it just means that while they use those 3 numbers, use their dominant center to take in information, they do not use that center to process. Okay. So a 3 is feeling dominant, but then they don't use feeling to process. So you and I, a 7 and an 8 and a 3 in a race, we're all competitive. We all want to be at the finish line first. We're going to, probably run over a few people to get to the finish line. Yeah. What's interesting is you being a 7 and being thinking dominant. If it's not fun, you might just kind of step out of it. Yeah. The 3, me being an 8 and a 3, we're still going to clobber our way to that finish line to get there first. I have no idea that I ran over anybody because I'm not relational. Yeah. A 3 knows it's not going to stop them from racing to the finish line, but the 3, being feeling dominant and feeling least accessed, is going to go help the people up that they ran over. Yeah. Oh, so good. It gets tricky. That's a good analogy. Yeah. Yeah. Essentially what it means is in the aggressive stance, a 3 is really pretty good at reading and responding and reacting to feelings in others, but they are not so good at dealing with them internally in themselves. And then 1, 2, and 6 are all in the dependent stance. And for those three numbers, dependent does not mean that they're dependent on other people. What it does mean is their reference point is outside of themselves. And so 1s and 2s and 6s, I believe that the dependent stance, you have to be the most on your game, on your A game as a parent for dependent children, because they can't help that their reference point is in the household and outside of them and what's going on with everyone else. Aggressive stance children can stand independent from it, and withdrawing stance children, 4s, 5s, and 9s, can just separate from it and withdraw from it.
Yeah.
But a dependent, so your 1s and your 2s and your 6s as children, they are probably your best barometer for how the family's doing and what the relational temperature is like in the home. They'll be the most noticing of conflict between parents. And so that, that's like I said, you've got to be kind of on your game the most with those kids. And then for 4s, 5s, and 9s, so for 1s, 2s, and 6s, what's least accessed for all three of them is thinking.
Okay.
And those three numbers in general, especially as adults, would say that's ridiculous that they're thinking all the time. And it's right. They're correct. They do think all the time, but it's usually unproductive thinking. So 1s are thinking about everything that needs to be done and everything that's incorrect and flawed and everything that they need to perfect. And that's a never-ending list. And 2s are thinking all the time about relationships and friendships and what, so the child that comes home and knows what's going on with everybody, that gets tricky. 2s are feeling dominant and thinking is least accessed. And 2s are the one number who actually feels what the person in front of them is feeling. Yeah. So your 2 child, whether they're male or female, is coming home and relating feelings that may not even be their own, that they've just absorbed from their friends at school.
Just being around them. Yeah.
Yes, literally just being around them. So some of the biggest work for all of us, some of the best work you can do is bringing up what's least accessed. Yeah. So for you and me and 3s, bringing up some feeling, right? That's where I try to be more relational and see people. For 1s, 2s, and 6s, it's bringing up thinking. So 6s, they're your child who's asking 1 million questions. And it's because they don't trust their own thinking. So they're thinking dominant and thinking least access. Yeah. So a 6 child asks a ton of questions. And it's important for parents of 6s to find ways to affirm the thinking and the choices that 6 children are trying to make, because what 6s are struggling with is doubt. They don't trust themselves. And we can get frustrated as parents of 6s because we take that often to mean that they don't trust us. Yeah. And that's just that least access thinking. All of their questions are showing that they don't trust themselves.
Yeah. So this is really, I feel like I've had a little bit of an epiphany while you've been talking. I think my oldest son might actually be a 6. Just from what I already know about 6s, and then what you've just said, combining the two, I thought maybe he was a 7, but now I'm wondering if he's a 6. And I don't know if those two could be mistyped, but he's
as children, definitely. And
yeah. So what's interesting to me is I think about how when he asks a lot of questions, how I'm often kind of in my own head.
Sure.
And I get frustrated really easily. And I'm realizing, well, that's if we're both thinking, right?
Right. Yes, you're both thinking dominant. We're both thinking
dominant. And it's almost like his thoughts are interrupting me being in my own thoughts.
Yes.
And I have a hard time meeting him kind of meeting those needs for all it's like draining to me because I'm thinking.
And it would be because you get your energy from thinking positively and planning and pondering. You get all of your energy from thinking about all the good stuff. And 6s, a lot of their energy goes into worst case scenario thinking and planning.
Yes.
And that's how they see. And so very often 6s will push against that they're fearful. Because for them, those thoughts that are based in fear, you've got fear, you're dealing with fear just like your son, if he's a 6, is dealing with fear. Just like Billy and I as an 8 and a 9, along with 1s are dealing with anger. 2s, 3s, and 4s are dealing with shame, and 5s, 6s, and 7s are dealing with fear in one way or another. And your way for dealing with fear that you naturally have is to diffuse it.
Right.
And you diffuse it by thinking about the best and most positive possibilities.
Yes.
If your child's a 6, or any child who is a 6, the way they deal with their fear is to think of the worst things that could happen, and then they make a plan for how to deal with it. So to give you a very real illustration of that, I was teaching in Jackson, Mississippi in January, and I had a young 20-something female talk about, she's a 6, and talk about driving around Jackson as a little girl and mentally, she's thinking dominant, mapping Jackson, the city of Jackson, in her head. And here's why. She had already thought and planned through if she was ever kidnapped and put in the trunk of a car, she would get out of the trunk, and then having that map in her head, she would be able to get back home.
Wow. Yeah.
So 6s aren't, I always say, 6s aren't walking around the world wringing their hands like Chicken Little saying the sky's going to fall.
Right.
They're saying the sky could very well fall, and what's my plan, right?
Yeah.
What's our plan for dealing with it?
Oh, this is so good. Is there anything for working moms in particular that you feel could be important, especially as working mom? I mean, all moms are working moms who work outside the home or for a paycheck, where they might feel as though, I have literally 3 hours a day with my kid. And all of these people need me, my work people need me, my spouse needs me, my kids need me, my other friends and family need me. What advice do you have for working moms as far as Enneagram and parenting goes that they might be able to take away as a little nugget?
Honestly, it's learn the Enneagram as quickly as possible. And
but don't take
why.
a test. Don't take a test.
Right. The written test really, I'm not going to say don't, you don't have a lot of time as it is.
Well, it mistyped me. So I will, I did one before I knew not to do one.
Yeah.
And
it did mistype you.
It mistyped me. Yeah. I think, I can't remember what I was typed as, but once I started reading, then I said, oh no, now I know. Now I know what I am.
I did some work with the company Sargento, Sargento Cheese, the guys in front of the barn. Their legal team hired me to work with them last July, do Enneagram work. And I went up and spent the first day helping everyone find their number. And then the second day doing stance work because it's, with the group because it's so important. And out of a staff of 16, those who had taken the written test, I bet 11 were incorrect. We had to get them. We had to find the correct number. Yeah. So it's just be careful. Yep. The reason it's so important though to get the book or Life in the Trinity Ministry, which is where my mom teaches out of, kind of her base. You can get her recordings. Those are easily downloadable. On the website. Those MP3s. And the reason I say that is I think we spend so much time as individuals, parents, at work, at home, in every relationship we have, being offended and offending people.
Yes.
That we never, and we honestly, as human beings, on the whole, I don't think we set out to hurt each other, but we do it all the time. And we get frustrated and we frustrate all the time. And if you can get some Enneagram knowledge on board, then what it gives you is an understanding. Oh, that person that I'm so frustrated with at work, they're not trying to offend me or frustrate me. It's because they see the world so completely differently from the way I do. And it's going to save you so much energy to have at home. And then those interactions with your spouse and your children will be so much more life-giving because Enneagram almost gives you a shortcut to getting to the real stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Oh, this has been so helpful. I feel like we could go on, and I feel like I just want to bring you into my workplace, and I want to bring you into my house, and just say, help us all figure out what our numbers are. So
I've never been to either of the Carolinas, so
we might have to
just let me know. Yes.
We might have to work on that. Well, Joey, thank you so much, and just remind us here at the end, how can people find you? Because you do corporate training.
Yes.
Are you still doing that? So
yes,
yeah,
I do
okay.
that.
So how can people
I'm
find
actually
you?
doing it for a foundation in Dallas next week. So,
oh, very good.
I think you can go through. I think the best thing to do is go through lifeinthetrinityministry.com.
Mm-hmm.
That's the website where you can find the bios for me, my mom, and my dad and my husband Billy all teach. It'll give you a good idea for kind of what we offer. And then just an email to me at joey@lifeinthetrinityministry.com can also start the ball rolling on that work.
Very good. And
then I'm actually teaching locally. So I am teaching on June 8th in the Dallas area.
Oh, good.
An intro workshop to find your number.
Ooh.
And that registration will fill quickly. So for anyone who's local, I'm teaching that June 8th.
Excellent. Very good. And remind us, because that way people can learn maybe from your mom's podcast as well. What's the name of her podcast?
Her podcast is the Enneagram Journey.
Yes.
So
and
click
it's
on, if
so
you've got an
good.
iPhone, it's so good.
It is so good.
If you know your number and you have not picked up a copy of The Path Between Us, you should. It will just give you some immediate tools for having grace and understanding and compassion for other people, your children probably included. And then, as I said, Billy, check that website, because Billy and I will definitely be teaching our first Enneagram and Parenting workshop this fall for sure.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations. And
well, thank you.
I've just loved hearing not only about the Enneagram and parenting, but just about the work that you do. It's just really inspiring. So thanks so much. And
you're welcome.
maybe we
I
can
knew
do
a 7 and an 8 would have so much fun.
Absolutely.
And we did.
Yes, this was really fun. So thank you, Joey. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks for tuning in for another inspiring episode of the Influential Motherhood Podcast. Be sure to follow my own journey in motherhood and work at Melissa Duncan JD on Instagram, and follow the behind the scenes of the podcast at Influential Motherhood on Instagram and Facebook. If you're enjoying the Influential Motherhood podcast, please take a second to leave a rating or review in iTunes. It is how you can help other moms find the show so they can be inspired by these stories. See you next week.